Vanessa Caldwell thought she was protecting the prestige of the city's most exclusive private club that afternoon, but she had no idea that within the next hour, a single signature would unravel the reputation she had spent 10 years building. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The Kensington Club stood on Manhattan's Upper East Side like a monument to wealth. Crystal chandeliers glowed behind towering windows. Valets guided luxury cars beneath polished stone arches. Men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses drifted through the entrance as if they belonged to a world untouched by ordinary concerns. On that warm Friday evening, more than 200 guests had gathered for an annual leadership reception attended by investors, executives, and influential social figures from across New York. Every detail reflected exclusivity. Every face seemed carefully selected. Then Savannah Whitmore arrived. She stepped onto the sidewalk carrying a slim leather folder beneath one arm. At 39, she looked calm and composed, dressed in a simple navy blouse, dark slacks, and comfortable flats. No jewelry beyond a modest watch. No entourage. No luxury vehicle waiting at the curb. To most observers, she looked like someone running an errand after work. A few guests glanced at her briefly before returning to their conversations. Others barely noticed her at all. Savannah seemed perfectly comfortable with that. She walked toward the entrance with quiet confidence, her eyes focused on the grand doors ahead. Standing inside those doors was Vanessa Caldwell. As general manager of the Kensington Club, Vanessa considered herself the guardian of its image. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her white blazer looked immaculate. She greeted prominent guests by name and measured everyone else with a practiced glance that often decided their worth within seconds. When she noticed Savannah approaching, her smile faded almost imperceptibly. Her eyes traveled from Savannah's shoes to the leather folder in her hand, and then back to her face. The judgment took less than 2 seconds. Nearby staff members noticed the change immediately. One young employee exchanged an uncertain look with another. Vanessa stepped forward before Savannah could reach the registration desk. "Good evening," Savannah said politely. "I'm here for a scheduled meeting." Vanessa's expression remained professional, but something colder appeared beneath the surface. "Members and invited guests only," she replied. "I understand," Savannah said. "I'm expected." Vanessa glanced again at Savannah's simple clothing. Around them, several guests slowed their conversations. A few watched openly. Others pretended not to. The contrast was impossible to miss. One woman wore a diamond necklace worth more than most homes. Another guest stepped from a black luxury sedan while a valet hurried to open the door. Savannah stood among them carrying nothing but a folder and a quiet smile. Vanessa folded her hands. "May I ask who invited you?" she said. Savannah answered calmly. "The board requested my presence." For a brief moment, silence hovered between them. Then Vanessa let out a soft laugh. Not loud enough to create a scene, just enough for the nearest guests to hear. "The board," she repeated. Several heads turned. Savannah's expression never changed. Vanessa tilted her head slightly and said, "Then perhaps you can tell me something very simple before I allow you inside. Which member of the board supposedly requested you by name?" Savannah met Vanessa's gaze without the slightest sign of discomfort. "The request came through corporate channels," she said evenly. "I was told the board meeting materials would be waiting inside." Vanessa's smile grew thinner. Around them, the soft hum of conversation had begun to fade as more guests noticed the exchange unfolding near the entrance. The evening air carried the sound of distant traffic, but inside the club's marble foyer, attention was steadily shifting toward the woman being questioned at the door. "Corporate channels," Vanessa repeated, as though the phrase itself were amusing. "That is very vague." A few nearby guests exchanged knowing looks. One man holding a crystal glass smirked and quietly whispered something to his companion. Savannah remained calm. "I do not believe I am required to discuss internal business matters in front of strangers." That answer only seemed to strengthen Vanessa's confidence. In her mind, genuine executives announced themselves immediately. They arrived with assistants, security details, luxury cars, and recognizable names. They certainly did not arrive alone carrying a simple leather folder. Then perhaps you can provide identification, Vanessa said. Something that confirms your connection to this event. Savannah nodded slightly. I can do that. She reached toward her bag, but Vanessa raised a hand before she could continue. The gesture was subtle, yet unmistakably dismissive. Actually, Vanessa said, before we waste any more time, I would prefer something more specific. The surrounding guests listened openly now. Several employees had paused their work. Near the registration desk, Ethan Brooks watched with growing unease. As assistant general manager, he had spent years learning how quickly appearances could mislead. There was something about Savannah's composure that bothered him. Most people confronted in this manner became defensive, embarrassed, or angry. Savannah displayed none of those reactions. Instead, she stood perfectly relaxed, as though she knew something everyone else did not. Ethan considered stepping forward, but Vanessa's authority carried enormous weight within the club. Challenging her publicly could create its own problems. So he remained silent, though the feeling in his stomach continued to grow. Vanessa folded her arms. You claim the board requested your presence, she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Surely you can tell us which director invited you. Savannah glanced briefly at the crowd gathering around them. I do not think this conversation is appropriate for a public audience. A few people chuckled. Vanessa smiled. Convenient answer. More laughter followed. The atmosphere was shifting from curiosity to entertainment. Savannah had become an unexpected spectacle during an evening designed to celebrate influence and status. Yet she still showed no sign of retreating. I am not asking for special treatment, Savannah said. I am simply asking to attend a meeting that was scheduled in advance. And I am responsible for protecting this club, Vanessa replied. That includes verifying claims that do not make sense. Ethan noticed several employees exchanging uncomfortable glances. Even some guests seemed uncertain now. The situation was beginning to feel excessive. Still, nobody intervened. The power of a confident accusation often outweighed the quiet voice of fairness. Vanessa took a deliberate step forward and pointed toward the registration desk. If you truly belong here, she announced, then prove it in front of everyone. Give us the name of the board member expecting you, or show the contents of that folder right now. The crowd fell silent. Every eye turned toward Savannah and the leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Savannah looked at the circle of faces surrounding her and then down at the leather folder beneath her arm. The silence hanging in the air felt heavier now. Guests who had arrived expecting an elegant evening had found something more entertaining. They were watching a woman stand alone against the authority of the club's management, and most had already decided who they believed. The contents of this folder are confidential, Savannah said calmly. I am not authorized to display them in a public lobby. Vanessa spread her hands as though the answer proved her point. There it is, she said. Another excuse. Several people nodded. One guest near the entrance chuckled softly. Another whispered that if someone truly belonged at an event like this, they would not have so much trouble proving it. Savannah heard every word, yet her expression remained unchanged. That composure only seemed to irritate Vanessa further. People were supposed to become flustered under pressure. They were supposed to retreat when confronted publicly. Instead, Savannah stood there with the same quiet confidence she had displayed from the moment she arrived. Ethan Brooks watched from beside the registration desk. The longer the exchange continued, the more uncomfortable he became. Something about Savannah's behavior refused to fit Vanessa's narrative. Genuine imposters usually over-explained themselves. They became defensive or aggressive. Savannah was doing neither. She simply looked like someone waiting for common sense to return to the room. Perhaps we should contact the board directly, Ethan suggested carefully. Vanessa shot him a glance. The board is currently hosting tonight's reception. They do not need to be interrupted every time someone appears at the door with a story. Ethan immediately fell silent. A few guests laughed again. Savannah shifted the folder slightly beneath her arm. As she did, a small card slipped partially from one of the inner pockets before she quickly tucked it back inside. The movement lasted less than a second, but Ethan caught a glimpse of thick ivory stock with an embossed silver crest. It looked remarkably similar to the insignia used by Kensington Holdings, the parent company that owned the club itself. His brow furrowed. Why would she be carrying something like that? Before he could think further, Vanessa stepped closer. You know what I find interesting? She said. Most people who belong here are recognized immediately. Their names mean something. The crowd listened closely. Yet nobody seems to know yours. Savannah met her gaze. That does not mean I do not belong here. Actually, Vanessa replied, smiling coldly. That is exactly what it means. A murmur of agreement passed through several guests. The pressure was building now. More people had gathered near the entrance. Some held drinks. Others checked their phones while continuing to watch. What had started as a brief disagreement was becoming the evening's unofficial spectacle. Savannah could feel dozens of eyes fixed upon her. Still, she refused to surrender her dignity. I have a scheduled responsibility inside this building, she said. Whether you believe me or not does not change that fact. Vanessa laughed softly. Confidence is impressive. Evidence is better. Then she turned toward the registration desk and made a decision that instantly changed the atmosphere. Since our guest insists she belongs here, she announced loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. Let us settle this properly. Guests moved closer. Conversations stopped completely. Even the musicians playing near the ballroom entrance seemed quieter. Vanessa pointed toward the center of the marble foyer and said, I want everyone to hear this. If she truly has business with the board, she can explain herself in front of all of us right now. The marble foyer seemed to shrink as every conversation died away. More than 200 guests now watched openly, their attention fixed on Savannah as though she were standing beneath a spotlight. Vanessa Caldwell appeared energized by the audience. The larger the crowd became, the more confident she seemed. Well, she asked, you wanted to come inside. Here is your chance. Explain yourself. Savannah looked around the room. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished floors. Waiters carrying silver trays stood frozen near the ballroom entrance. Executives, investors, and socialites watched with open curiosity. Some appeared amused. Others looked uncomfortable. None stepped forward. Savannah understood what was happening. This was no longer about verifying a guest. It had become a public demonstration of power. Vanessa wanted everyone to see who controlled access to this world. I do not owe strangers an explanation of private business matters, Savannah said calmly. I only need access to the meeting I was invited to attend. A few people shook their heads. Someone near the back muttered that she still had not answered the question. Another guest quietly suggested that real executives did not arrive looking like they had come from an ordinary office. The comments spread through the crowd like ripples across water. Vanessa smiled. Then we are finished here. The words echoed through the foyer. Ethan Brooks felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This had gone far beyond reasonable caution. Yet he still hesitated. Vanessa's authority was unquestioned within the club, and challenging her publicly could jeopardize everything he had worked for. Still, something about Savannah's composure continued to bother him. She was not behaving like someone caught in a lie. She looked more like someone witnessing a mistake unfold in slow motion. Vanessa turned toward the security desk. Please escort this woman from the property. The room went silent. Even those who had been smiling moments earlier seemed surprised by the escalation. Savannah remained perfectly still. She neither argued nor protested. She simply looked at Vanessa with an expression that carried neither anger nor fear. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across a few faces in the crowd. There was something deeply unsettling about a person who refused to become humiliated when humiliation was clearly the goal. Do you have anything else to say? Vanessa asked. The question carried the confidence of someone expecting surrender. Savannah considered her for a moment before answering. Only this. Her voice was quiet, yet somehow every person in the foyer heard it. The easiest judgment to make is based on appearance. It requires no effort, no patience, and no understanding. The harder choice is taking a moment to learn who someone really is. No one spoke. A hush settled over the room. Even Vanessa seemed caught off guard by the response. There was no bitterness in Savannah's words. No accusation. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Just a simple truth delivered with dignity. The silence lingered for several long seconds. Then Savannah adjusted the leather folder beneath her arm and turned toward the entrance. The crowd slowly parted to make room for her. Ethan noticed several guests avoiding eye contact as she passed. Others watched her leave with expressions that suggested growing doubt. Near the doorway, the evening sunlight cast a golden reflection across the marble floor. Savannah walked toward it without rushing, her posture straight, her expression calm. She looked neither defeated nor angry. She looked certain. As she reached the doors, her phone vibrated softly inside her bag. She paused, glanced at the screen, and for the first time that evening, a faint smile appeared on her face. Savannah stepped through the club's front doors and into the fading glow of the Manhattan evening. The warm air felt strangely peaceful after the tension inside. Behind her, conversations slowly resumed, and the grand entrance returned to business as usual, as though nothing important had happened. Yet the faint smile that had appeared when her phone vibrated remained on her face. She glanced at the screen once more before slipping the phone back into her bag. The message was brief, running 5 minutes ahead of schedule. See you soon. Savannah looked across the street toward the city's skyline shimmering in gold and silver reflections. For a moment, she simply stood there. The humiliation she had just experienced should have angered her. It should have left her bitter. Instead, it stirred something much older. Something far more personal. 20 years earlier, her father had stood outside a different building in another city. He had been a mechanic who spent his life working with his hands. One afternoon, dressed in worn clothes after a long shift, he had walked into a bank seeking a business loan. The loan officer never looked beyond the grease stains on his sleeves. He was dismissed before anyone listened to his idea. Savannah had never forgotten the look on her father's face when he came home that evening. Not anger, not humiliation, disappointment. He had told her something that day she carried for the rest of her life. The world will always offer people two choices, he had said. They can judge what they see, or they can learn what is true. Years later, after his small repair shop became a thriving company and eventually grew into a national enterprise, he never returned to that bank seeking revenge. Instead, he donated money to local schools and scholarships. He taught her that dignity was never something another person could take away. It was something you chose to keep. That lesson had shaped every decision Savannah made as a leader. It was also why tonight mattered. The meeting inside Kensington Club was not merely another corporate obligation. Tonight marked the final step in a transition that had taken nearly 3 years to complete. A promise she had made before her father passed away. A promise to build a company where character mattered more than appearances. Footsteps approached from behind. Savannah turned to find Ethan Brooks emerging from the entrance. He looked nervous, as though unsure whether he should be there. "Ms. Whitmore," he called. She stopped and waited. Ethan reached her and lowered his voice. "I wanted to apologize." Savannah smiled gently. "For what?" "For not speaking up sooner." Ethan glanced back toward the club. "Something about that situation felt wrong. I knew it did, but I stood there anyway." Savannah studied him for a moment. "Doing the right thing is easier when there is no risk attached to it," she said. "The fact that you recognize the unfairness matters more than you realize." Ethan looked surprised. "You are not upset?" "No," Savannah replied. "The world already has enough angry people." For the first time all evening, Ethan smiled. The tension seemed to leave his shoulders. Then both of them heard it. A low mechanical hum echoed from the far end of the street. Several pedestrians turned toward the sound. Valets near the club entrance straightened immediately. Conversations began to fade again. The deep purr of multiple luxury engines grew louder with every passing second, and suddenly the atmosphere outside Kensington Club felt completely different. The sound grew steadily louder until 3 black executive sedans turned onto the street and rolled toward the Kensington Club with quiet precision. There was nothing flashy about their arrival. No sirens. No dramatic display. Yet the reaction they created was immediate. Valets straightened. Staff members exchanged confused looks. Even guests standing near the entrance paused their conversations. The vehicles came to a smooth stop beneath the club's stone archway. Ethan Brooks watched as the first rear door opened. A tall man in his 60s stepped out wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a slim portfolio. His silver hair and calm expression were instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the business world. Ethan felt his stomach drop. "That cannot be him," he whispered. But it was. Charles Kensington, chairman of Kensington Holdings, the parent corporation that owned the club and dozens of luxury properties across the country, had just arrived. Inside the lobby, Vanessa Caldwell was still speaking with several guests when a security employee hurried toward her and quietly said something in her ear. Vanessa frowned. "Charles Kensington is here," she repeated. The color drained slightly from her face. The chairman rarely visited club events personally. His schedule was legendary. Most managers went years without seeing him in person. Vanessa immediately adjusted her jacket and moved toward the entrance with practiced professionalism. Several board members who had been mingling near the ballroom also began making their way forward. Outside, Savannah remained standing near the sidewalk. She appeared completely unsurprised. Ethan noticed this immediately. While everyone else reacted with astonishment, Savannah simply watched the arriving vehicles as though she had been expecting them all along. The second sedan door opened. Two senior executives emerged. The third vehicle stopped behind them. More corporate leadership stepped onto the pavement. The atmosphere shifted again. This no longer felt like an ordinary reception. It felt like something much larger was unfolding. Charles Kensington spotted Savannah almost immediately. His expression softened. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, he walked past the club entrance, past the waiting board members, and directly toward her. Conversations died instantly. Vanessa slowed to a stop. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Every guest near the doorway turned to watch. Charles extended his hand warmly. "Savannah," he said. "I was afraid traffic would make me late." Savannah smiled. "You are right on time." The simplicity of the exchange somehow made it even more powerful. There was familiarity in it. Respect. Neither person behaved like a stranger. Vanessa felt a knot form in her stomach. For the first time all evening, uncertainty replaced confidence. Charles glanced toward the entrance. His eyes moved across the gathered crowd, the uneasy staff, and finally settled on Vanessa herself. He noticed the tension immediately. Men who spent decades leading major organizations learned to read rooms quickly. "Is there a problem?" he asked. No one answered. The silence stretched across the entrance like a heavy curtain. Ethan looked toward Savannah. Vanessa looked toward Savannah. The board members looked toward Savannah. Suddenly, every eye in sight seemed fixed on the woman who had been asked to leave only minutes earlier. Charles studied their expressions and slowly pieced together what had happened. His face became still. Not angry, not emotional, just still. Then he turned back toward Savannah and spoke words that landed with the force of a thunderclap. "Would you like to tell them yourself?" he asked quietly. "Or should I introduce the new chief executive officer of Kensington Holdings?" For several seconds, nobody moved. The city noise beyond the street seemed to disappear. The only thing that remained was the stunned silence hanging over the entrance. Vanessa Caldwell stared at Savannah as though the world beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. Around them, guests exchanged bewildered looks. A few board members lowered their eyes. Others appeared genuinely shocked. The woman they had watched being questioned, mocked, and escorted toward the door was standing beside the chairman himself. Charles Kensington looked calmly across the gathering before speaking again. "Savannah Whitmore officially assumes leadership next month," he said. Tonight's meeting was arranged so she could review the final transition documents and meet several of our partners. The words spread through the crowd like a wave. Ethan Brooks felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Suddenly, every strange detail from earlier made sense. The confidence, the composure, the refusal to explain herself. Savannah had never been trying to prove her worth. She had simply expected to be treated with basic respect. Vanessa opened her mouth, but struggled to find words. I was only following procedures," she finally managed. Charles said nothing. Instead, he looked toward Savannah, allowing her to decide how the moment would unfold. Many people expected retaliation. Several guests anticipated a public reckoning equal to the humiliation they had witnessed earlier. But Savannah surprised them. "Vanessa was not wrong to verify identities," she said gently. "Every organization needs standards." Vanessa looked up in confusion. Savannah continued. "The problem was never caution. The problem was deciding who deserved respect before knowing who they were." A hush settled over the crowd once again. Ethan took a slow breath. Then, for the first time all evening, he stepped forward. "That is true," he said. Several heads turned toward him. Ethan swallowed hard, but continued anyway. "I should have spoken sooner. I knew something felt unfair. I saw it happen and stayed quiet." Savannah offered him a small nod of appreciation. Not a gesture of authority, a gesture of encouragement. The simple acknowledgement seemed to ease the weight Ethan had been carrying all evening. Charles then opened the portfolio he had brought with him. Inside were several documents bearing the Kensington Holdings crest. "There is something else everyone should know," he said. Curious murmurs moved through the crowd. Charles smiled faintly. "For the last 5 years, The employee education fund that has paid college tuition for hundreds of workers across our properties was Savannah's idea. Several staff members exchanged surprised looks. The emergency assistance program that helped employees through medical hardships was her initiative as well. Now, even the board members appeared impressed. Savannah looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. "Those programs were team efforts," she said quietly. Charles shook his head. "Only because you insisted on remaining anonymous." Ethan felt another realization strike him. The woman who had been treated like an outsider had quietly improved the lives of people throughout the organization without ever seeking recognition. Many of the employees standing nearby had benefited directly from programs she created, yet none of them had known her name. The mood around her transformed completely. Earlier, people had seen an ordinary woman who seemed out of place. Now they saw someone whose influence had touched countless lives while asking for nothing in return. The admiration in their eyes was impossible to miss. Savannah remained exactly the same person she had been an hour earlier. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else finally understood about her. The atmosphere outside the club had completely transformed. The same guests who had watched Savannah with skepticism now looked at her with genuine respect. Staff members stood a little straighter. Conversations carried a different tone. What had begun as an uncomfortable public spectacle had become a lesson nobody expected to receive. Charles Kensington closed his portfolio and looked toward the entrance. "The meeting can wait a few minutes," he said. "There is something more important to address first." His words immediately drew everyone's attention. Vanessa Caldwell stood silently near the doorway. The confidence that had carried her through the evening was gone. For the first time, she seemed less concerned about her position and more concerned about understanding how she had been so wrong. Charles glanced toward Savannah. "As incoming chief executive officer, the decision is yours." Several people expected disciplinary action. Others anticipated a public reprimand. Instead, Savannah surprised them once again. "No one should lose their future because of one mistake," she said. Vanessa looked up in disbelief. Savannah continued, "But every mistake should teach us something valuable." The crowd listened carefully. "Starting next month, every Kensington property will implement a new leadership training program. Managers will be evaluated not only on performance and revenue, but also on how they treat people. Respect will become a measurable standard." A quiet murmur moved through the group. Several employees exchanged approving looks. Savannah turned toward Ethan Brooks. "And people who demonstrate integrity, even when it is difficult, should be recognized." Ethan seemed genuinely startled when she smiled at him. "You were willing to admit that staying silent was wrong. That takes courage." Charles nodded in agreement. Effective immediately, Ethan will join the Regional Leadership Development Program. Ethan blinked in surprise. "I thank you." His voice carried genuine emotion. Savannah then addressed the employees gathered near the entrance. "Many of you work hard every day without recognition. Some of you have benefited from programs I helped create. Others have ideas that could improve this company, but never feel heard. That changes now." Several staff members looked at one another with growing optimism. For years, decisions had often flowed from the top down. Tonight felt different. It felt personal. It felt human. Vanessa listened quietly. The punishment she had feared never came. There was no humiliation, no public shaming, no dramatic display of authority. Instead, Savannah was using her influence to strengthen the very system that had failed her only an hour earlier. Somehow that made the lesson even more powerful. One by one, guests approached Savannah. Some offered apologies. Others thanked her for her words. Board members who had barely noticed her arrival now spoke with visible admiration. The transformation was remarkable. Yet Savannah accepted every conversation with the same calm grace she had shown throughout the evening. She had not changed. Everyone else had. As the crowd slowly moved back toward the reception, Vanessa remained standing near the entrance. The grand doors reflected the city lights behind her. She watched employees speaking with renewed energy. She watched Ethan receiving congratulations. She watched guests treating Savannah with respect that should have been offered from the beginning. Finally, Vanessa stepped forward. "I thought prestige came from protecting the right people," she said quietly. Savannah met her eyes. "And now?" Vanessa looked around the club she had spent years managing. Then she lowered her gaze for a moment before answering. "Now I realize prestige comes from treating every person with dignity before you know who they are." Later that evening, the reception finally began, but it felt different from the one originally planned. The grand ballroom still shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Soft music still drifted through the room. Guests still exchanged business cards and conversation. Yet an invisible shift had taken place. People were speaking less about investments and partnerships and more about character, respect, and the lesson they had witnessed together. Savannah Whitmore eventually entered the meeting she had come to attend from the very beginning. The transition documents were reviewed. The final agreements were signed. Years of preparation came to a quiet conclusion without fanfare. When Savannah placed her signature on the final page, she thought briefly of her father and the promise she had made long ago. Not a promise to become powerful, not a promise to become wealthy, a promise to build something better than the systems that had once judged him unfairly. In that moment, she knew she had fulfilled it. After the meeting concluded, Charles Kensington approached her with a warm smile. He would have been proud, he said softly. Savannah looked toward the city lights beyond the ballroom windows and nodded. I hope so. Nearby, Ethan Brooks was speaking with several senior executives about the leadership development opportunity he had been offered. The uncertainty that once filled his expression had been replaced by quiet confidence. For the first time, people were noticing not only his competence, but also his integrity. More than once that evening, executives stopped to shake his hand and congratulate him. The opportunity was not a reward for perfection. It was a reward for honesty. As the evening drew to a close, Vanessa Caldwell approached Savannah. There was no audience now. No crowd. No pressure. Just two people standing near the entrance where everything had begun. Vanessa took a slow breath. I owe you an apology, she said. Not because of your title. Not because of your position. Because I failed to treat you with the respect every person deserves. Savannah listened quietly. Vanessa continued. I spent years believing I was protecting standards. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what those standards were supposed to be protecting. There was no excuse in her voice. No attempt to defend herself. Only sincerity. Savannah offered a small smile. Then tonight was not a failure, she said. Vanessa lowered her eyes for a moment before nodding. The lesson had cost her pride, but it had given her something far more valuable in return. As guests slowly departed and staff prepared to close the event, Savannah stepped outside one last time. The city stretched before her in a sea of lights. The same sidewalk where she had stood alone earlier now felt entirely different. Not because people finally knew who she was, but because she had remained true to herself when they did not. A cool breeze moved through the street. Behind her, laughter and conversation drifted from the club. Ahead of her, a new chapter waited. Savannah stood quietly for a moment, then walked forward with the same calm dignity she had carried all evening. And that night, everyone remembered that dignity does not need status to be recognized. It only needs someone humble enough to see it.